Why does a man who is already the best in the world feel the need to go faster? He had 3 world championships, 65 pole positions, a reputation so untouchable that his competitors who had spent their entire lives chasing this sport would look at his qualifying laps and simply shake their heads. He had already won. By every measure that existed, he had already won. And yet, on the morning of the 1st of May 1994, he climbed into his car at Imola and went looking for more. What drove him to that corner at that speed on that particular Sunday? It is not a simple question. It never was with Senna, because behind the helmet was a man who believed God had given him a gift, who cried in his cockpit because the feeling was too large to contain, who told people close to him that the rain was not something to fear. It was where he finally felt like himself. Ayrton Senna da Silva was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 1960. He came from money, which gave him access to karting at a young age, but money alone does not explain what he became. From the moment he sat in a racing car, people around him noticed something they could not quite name. It was not just talent. Talent was common at that level. It was something closer to obsession, a complete inability to accept anything less than everything. He moved to Britain in the late 1970s to race in Formula Ford and Formula 3. He was relentless. He would show up at the track before anyone else and leave after everyone had gone. He studied circuits the way other people studied scripture. He wanted to understand not just how to be fast, but why he was fast, what was happening inside him when the car and the track and the conditions all came together. He made his Formula One debut with Toleman in 1984. He was in a car that had no business competing at the front. He got it to the front anyway. That year, in Monaco, in the wet, he was catching Alain Prost, who was in the dominant McLaren, at a rate that suggested he was about to win. The race was stopped, red flagged. Prost took the victory. The circumstances have been debated ever since. Senna never forgot it. By 1988, he was at McLaren. He won 8 world championships worth of races in a single season, 15 out of 16 races for the team, 8 of them his. He took 3 world titles, 1988, 1990, and 1991. And through all of it, the rain followed him. Or rather, he followed the rain. In wet conditions, Formula One becomes a different sport. The grip disappears. The car moves underneath you in ways it was not designed to move. Braking points that work in the dry become dangerous guesses in the wet. Most drivers respond to this by becoming conservative, by giving the car more margin, more space, more time. They slow down. This is not mythology. This is documented, lap by lap, race by race. At the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix in the wet, he was a full second per lap faster than the cars around him in a slower car. At Donington Park in 1993, in arguably the greatest opening lap in Formula One history, he started 4th in wet conditions and was in the lead by the end of the first corner sequence. Not the first lap, the first corner sequence. So how did he do it? The technical answer involves car control that existed at a level most drivers never reach. Senna could feel the car's balance shifting in fractions of a second and respond before the movement became a slide. His steering inputs were precise and early, meaning he set the car up for corners earlier than his competitors, giving him more time to manage what the rear was doing on exit. In the wet, where late inputs become catastrophic, this was the difference between control and chaos. His vision was exceptional, both physical and in terms of how far ahead he was in processing information. While other drivers were reacting to what the car was doing now, Senna was already calculating what it would be doing 3 corners later. Rain narrows the window of available road. The dry line, the line with any grip at all, is a thin strip. Senna found that strip and stayed on it with a consistency that looked, from the outside, impossible. His risk tolerance was calibrated differently from almost everyone else. Not reckless, he was not someone who simply drove without fear and got lucky. He had assessed the risk and decided that the speed was worth it. This is an important distinction. Recklessness is an absence of calculation. What Senna had was a different calculation. He genuinely believed that his skill reduced the risk to a level that made the speed acceptable. In most conditions, in most races, He was correct. But there was always a line, and the line between genius and self-destruction in Ayrton, Senna's career, was never far away. His rivalry with Alain Prost is one of the defining stories in the history of the sport, and it illustrates the point precisely. Prost was fast, intelligent, and almost mechanical in his management of a race. He understood that finishing was the precondition for winning. Senna understood this too, but only up to a point. For Senna, there was a version of racing that mattered more than the championship. It was the version where you found out exactly what was possible, where you pushed through whatever was in front of you and let the outcome sort itself out. At Suzuka in 1989, the two collided, and again in 1990, and this time it appeared deliberate. Senna later admitted as much. He had decided that he would not be moved from the racing line, and if Prost tried to move him, there would be contact. There was contact. He won the championship. This is not the behavior of a man who simply wants to win. This is the behavior of a man who has built an entire internal logic around the idea that his will and the outcome of the race are connected, that if he commits completely enough, reality will bend to accommodate him. It is a mindset that produces extraordinary results. It is also a mindset that has no off switch. By 1994, Senna was at Williams. He had left McLaren, spent a season in a car that was not competitive, and made the decision to join the team that had dominated the previous 2 years. He wanted the title back. He had not won it since 1991. You cannot talk about Ayrton Senna without talking about his faith. He was a deeply devout Christian, and his belief was not performative or incidental. It was structural to everything he did. He believed that God had given him the gift of speed. He believed that what happened on a racetrack was not purely the result of physics and preparation, but of something beyond both. In 1991, he spoke about an experience during qualifying at Monaco. He described entering a state where he and the car were no longer separate things. He was not driving around the circuit, he was flowing through it. He was extracting a performance that he knew on a conscious level exceeded what was possible. He pulled out of it. He was frightened by it. He said he stopped because he felt he was moving into a territory he had no right to be in. This relationship between faith and performance shaped how he understood risk. If God intended him to win, he would win. If God intended for something else, then something else. This is not the same as fatalism. Senna worked harder than almost anyone in the paddock. He was meticulous in his preparation, but underneath the preparation was a belief that his life had a shape to it that was not entirely in his hands. There are interviews in the final months of his life where he talks about death without the anxiety you might expect. He had made peace with the possibility in a way that is striking to watch back now. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix at Imola was not a normal race weekend before a wheel had even turned on Sunday. On Friday, during practice, Rubens Barrichello, a young Brazilian driver, a driver Senna had mentored, went over a curb at the Variante Bassa chicane, launched into the air, hit the tire barriers and the fencing, and came to a stop. The car was destroyed. Barrichello was knocked unconscious. He survived, but only just. The images from that incident went around the paddock. The mood shifted. Then on Saturday, Roland Ratzenberger, an Austrian driver making only his second Formula One start, went out for qualifying. His front wing had been damaged in an earlier session. It failed at Villeneuve Corner at over 300 kilometers per hour. The car went straight into the concrete wall. Ratzenberger was killed instantly. He was 33 years old. Senna was in the medical car that went to the scene. He saw what had happened. He returned to the paddock and, according to multiple witnesses, he was shaken in a completely uncharacteristic way. He had seen death before. He had seen it in karting. He had watched friends die in racing. But Imola that weekend was different. The frequency of it, within 48 hours, in front of the entire paddock, was something no one had been prepared for. He reportedly told his friend and countryman Galvão Bueno that night that he did not want to race. Not that he was afraid. That is too simple a reading. More than something felt wrong to him. That the weekend had a weight he could not shake. He called his girlfriend, Adrienne Galisteu, that night. He told her he loved her. He called his family. He sat with the Austrian flag, intending to wave it in memory of Ratzenberger if he won the race. And then, on Sunday morning, he got in the car. The atmosphere in the paddock on Sunday was unlike any race weekend in recent memory. The sport was already questioning itself. Ground effect aerodynamics had been banned that year, and the cars were handling unpredictably as a result. Senna had already had concerns about the Williams FW16. It was not behaving the way he expected, and he had been vocal about it internally. In the first 2 races of the season, he had retired from both while leading. He was under enormous pressure. The new regulations had, in his view, made the cars less safe, and he had been raising this in the drivers' meetings. He was the GPDA director, the representative body for the drivers. He had been pushing for a meeting after the race to discuss safety. He never made it to that meeting. At the race start, there was an accident at the back of the field. JJ Leto stalled on the grid and was struck from behind by Pedro Lani. Debris went into the crowd. 5 spectators were injured. The safety car came out. When the safety car came in on lap 5, the race was live again. Senna led. And then, at Tamburello, the long, fast left-hand corner that every driver knew, that every driver had taken thousands of times, his car went straight, not a spin, not an overcorrection, straight, into the concrete wall. The impact was at approximately 211 kilometers per hour. The right front wheel came back and struck his helmet. He was extracted from the car and airlifted to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. He was declared dead at 1840 local time. He was 34 years old. The investigation into the crash ran for years. The exact cause has never been definitively established. A steering column failure has been the most widely discussed factor. The car may have been modified in a way that compromised the column's integrity. There are other theories, none of them brings complete clarity. What is clear is this. At the moment of the crash, Ayrton Senna was doing exactly what he had always done. He was at the front of the race, pushing the car to the edge of what it could do, committed completely to the next corner. He did not die making a mistake. He died the way he lived, at the absolute limit. Formula One was never the same after Imola 1994. The sport underwent a structural overhaul of its safety standards. The circuits were redesigned. The cars were redesigned. The rules governing medical response were rewritten. Drivers who race today in cars that have survived impacts that would have been unsurvivable in 1994 are alive in part because of what happened that weekend. Senna won 41 Grands Prix. He took 65 pole positions. He won 3 world championships. He is still, more than 30 years later, the name that comes up first when people argue about who was the greatest. But none of that explains what he was. The numbers measure the outcomes. They do not measure the thing he had in the rain, that total, terrifying, almost unreasonable belief that the car and the conditions and the result were all under his control, that if he pushed hard enough through the corner, something on the other side of the limit would catch him. For most of his career, it did. At Tamburello, it didn't. And that is the line he walked for his entire career, the line between genius and self-destruction, the line that made him the greatest and then, on a Sunday afternoon in Italy, took him. Ayrton Senna, gone at 34. Unrepeatable.